Malcolm, I'm excited. I'm excited for you to drive this one because you've been stewing on this for maybe how long? How long have you been stewing on this?
It's been at least 2 months. So, Hannah, what you probably don't know, because I don't think I talked to you about it, was I read what's that lady's name? Melvy, something like that. The book Inheritocracy.
Right.
And when I say I read it, I mean I listened to the Audible version.
Eliza Philby.
But yeah, so the book Inheritocracy is actually, I mean, it's a bunch of different directions that it goes, but it got my attention because it's really about the underlying impact that the bank of mom and dad has on society presently that we as millennials and Gen Zers don't see, but also the impact that it's going to have on millennials and Gen Zers and whoever comes after that. And so the K-shaped economy that we all became hyper aware of during COVID has only turned into a steeper and steeper K. And the haves have gotten havier and the have-nots have gotten naughtier. And I think that this wave, like we all talk about this multi-trillion-dollar transfer that's expected to happen, the highest credible estimates I've seen are like around $125 trillion with a T that our brains can't really quantify what that means. But the reason it's so interesting is because it has such a direct impact on modern society. And so to Ricky's point, I went down this rabbit hole and have even been looking at like how my day-to-day conversations with 60, 70, 80-year-old clients about giving to their kids now while they actually need the money and creating a living inheritance will be way more impactful, even if it's smaller dollars, than 30 years from now when the second one of them passes away and they leave the money to their kids. So anyway, let me not front run too much of the conversation, but Ricky's right. I've been very deep into this one for a few months now, as I've really been like reflecting on the work that I do on a daily basis and even what that impacts, for better or for worse, can and will have on the broader society of the children of people who are going to be leaving something to them versus the people who don't have that level of support.
Yeah. I mean, it's a really interesting topic, and it feeds a lot into, I write about a lot how a lot of younger generations believe that the American dream is dead. And so I think that contributes to a lot of their financial behavior around financial nihilism and like gambling like behavior. If you look at kind of the stock market, and this is kind of like another example of that, because, you know, the whole premise of like work hard, get rewarded is kind of not holding true when it feels like, at least in the economy, the only way you can really get ahead is, you know, by, you know, participating in this gambling like economy or getting money from your family. So I do agree that it's going to have big repercussions kind of in the years and decades to come.
Ricky, do you want to formally get us rolling?
I think we should introduce our guest.
I think that's a good idea.
Hanna Horvath. She rates your brain on money. You can find her on social media. We're grateful for her time. Thanks for being here to talk about secret family money, the inheritocracy, and the effect of parents, grandparents giving money to their children and what that means for the economy.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here.
All right, let's get into it.
You use the word secret, and I think that adds a whole other element to it that has to work its way into this conversation, because a lot of the times there's shame attached to receiving help from family that causes people to not be willing to talk about the fact that they receive help from their family. And so you have a friend who buys a $2 million house and they and their spouse collectively make $100,000. And you say, well, that math ain't mathin'. Like, how in the hell did you guys just pull that off? And they say, oh, well, we made some really smart investments. Oh, well, you know, we've done really good on Polymarket. Oh, there's always a thing that like, you're like, don't insult my intelligence. I know there's some other force happening here but then on the flip side, you've got the friends that like one person's an attorney and they're married to a software engineer. And you imagine, they should make $400,000, $500,000, $600,000 combined, and that should equate a $2 million house. Still probably not, but they got the house one way or another. And that's where I think it happens, where it happens a lot more secretly, and it's hush hush. And one of them has the bank of mom and dad that helped to make that come true.
And if you hear a tap tap in the background, it is raining in New York where Hanna is. Malcolm, to your point, though, I think there's a mix of factors there. Number one is if you say I'm getting lots and lots of help from my mommy and daddy, number one, that's infantilizing. Number two, it's kind of directly antithetical to the American dream, which is I have worked hard and earned the things that I have. No more questions about how I've been able to buy this cryptocurrency company. And then number three is it can create social, like a lot of this book is about how generational wealth creates social divisions. Mm-hmm. And I think that if someone is openly talking about how their parents paid for a down payment for their home, that can create that division more so than we went on a vacation from with our family. There's I think in a lot of times an assumption that the older generation is paying for that.
Yeah. In my work, I read a lot about how there is a real psychological difference between earned wealth and inherited wealth and how you perceive that. And it's also rooted in this idea in America of the meritocracy, right? Like, where like the individual is the one that's kind of in control of their own destiny. So if you're really financially successful, it's because you worked hard alone. And, if you struggle financially, that's kind of based on your own personal failure. And, obviously a lot of my work is around like the structural factors that make that not possible for everybody. But I think when it comes to the bank of mom and dad, there's kind of this two things happening where, people want to act like they earned whatever they have. Mm-hmm. And I think part of that is self-identity. Like you don't want the money that your parents are giving you to bump up against the successful persona you have of yourself. So I think a lot of people, when they kind of hide the fact that they got familial support, they're also just lying to themselves, or they're trying to convince themselves that like, well, even though like I got, my parents gave me $100,000 for a down payment, I'm not like a trust fund baby. I don't fall into that camp. And there's levels to this, of course. And so again, I think a lot of this also comes into social comparison, like the desire to fit in and, not wanting to be seen as outside of the norm. So we're all kind of playing this dance where we're kind of acting like we did this on our own merit, not wanting to admit when we got help. And this goes both ways too, whether your parents are giving you $100,000 for a down payment or whether they are helping you pay for your car repair when your car breaks down. Like, people don't want to admit that they're getting help sometimes. I think there's a shame associated with that. And so I think there's a lot of really complicated emotions and, again, money is very intersected with our identity. So I think it gets very complicated for people. But at the same time, I live in New York. It's, a very metropolitan area. There's a lot of wealth here. If you're hanging out in circles where everybody around you is a millionaire, you feel like you have to keep up. There is a part of this that it's about perceptions and wanting to kind of fit in with your in-group too. So there's a lot of dynamics at play.
But it's interesting too, because you see how much leisure is afforded people either on social media or in real life. And you have this, like, for example, I'm in New York every week and I'm driving down the West Side Highway, and there's always a ton of people out jogging on that trail along the Hudson. And you look and you go, it's 11 o'clock in the morning or whatever. Why don't you people have somewhere to be? I would love to be out getting miles in, but I'm headed to work. So why do you people have so much free? And you have to keep in mind, like, these people have a level of support somewhere in this, and not everybody, right? Some people have done well for themselves, but in general, there's a level of support here that's allowing people to sort of have more of a laissez-faire approach to going about their day and their lives in some ways, because that safety net is there and it's so strong in ways that we all can't fathom. So like the safety net exists for a lot of people, especially those of us sitting here complaining on a podcast. Like, if you graduated college without student loans, you probably had help from the bank of mom and dad. Maybe you got a scholarship, maybe you got Pell Grants, maybe you whatever. But most people who manage to make it out of college without student loans, it's because the bank of mom and dad was there as support. Didn't feel like support to you. It seemed like what your parents were just supposed to do. But in comparison to your peers who graduated school with $300,000 of debt when it was all said and done, that makes a difference, right? So like those are the simple things that you can't even see. And that's what we're comparing to the bigger safety nets that are a little more ostentatious.
It's so interesting because that completely changes your relationship with risk and being able to, it completely changes the way that you make financial decisions. You know, not having debt, especially student loan debt, which typically if you have student loan debt, you have tens of thousands of dollars of it. But even having like, you know, again, I live in New York. I have people whose parents are basically giving them a monthly allowance and having that support, or even just knowing that you have a trust fund, that completely changes the way that you make financial decisions and how you decide to spend and save. And it's very intrinsically tied up with your identity. You know, I know somebody who had a trust fund. Her father got involved in some like litigation and she ended up losing her trust fund. And, you know, even though she didn't have access to the money before, she doesn't have access to it now, it completely changed her identity and how the way that she saw her money and she saw the financial decisions she was making. It completely rewired how she was making financial decisions. So it's very interesting to think about, you know, how something as simple as just the promise of money or having that financial foundation, that safety net, as you said, Malcolm, can completely change how you kind of see the world and approach your own decisions.
All right, now's the time. I graduated college without student loan debt.
I did too.
Yeah, and like I don't want to wag my finger at people who didn't have that, but yeah, I definitely, reading this book, it was a good reminder of some of the advantages that I had, which is I was able to graduate without student loan debt. That's because I went to a state school. I went to a school within Ohio. I went to Ohio State. Also, I was able to do things like stand-up comedy after class. I was able to take an internship with CNBC and live in New York City because I could work out a split of, hey, I'm going to earn my spending money, but my parents are going to help with rent while I'm doing that to gain this experience. So 100%, you get a leg up, and it's something to note and not, you know, I'm not going to bring it up every time I talk to my friends, but it's something that you need, that I am aware of.
Yeah. Go ahead.
What's interesting though, to that point really quickly, in the book, she brought my attention to something I hadn't really thought about, which was that people like you, Ricky, I'm wagging my finger at you specifically.
Not just the joggers on the highway who maybe just have a lunch break when they can take a jog.
No.
They have time in between meetings. It's not just
nobody in Midtown Manhattan takes their lunch break at 11 a.m. to go jogging casually down the trail when you just got off the freaking helipad at 8, went and played pickleball. Then anyway, let me stay on track. What I was gonna say is it made me think about a point in the book that was eye-opening for me. I hadn't really thought about, but that safety net that you're describing, knowing that mom and dad can help me with rent just so that I can take this opportunity, it has disrupted certain industries entirely where people would have been able to advance 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago based on their own merits. And that alone would have been enough to afford them certain things. So if you're a journalist, for example, we all know what the media business, the journalism business has morphed into over the last decade or 2 decades because of the internet. Now ChatGPT scraping everybody's work and on and on and on. So if you're sitting in a newsroom and you're talking to your coworker who just bought an apartment in the city somewhere, and you're like, well, I know how much I make. We do the same job. I know how much he probably makes. How is he able to buy that thing and I'm not able to buy that thing? And I do the same job. But one of the things that's been disrupted is the idea of my hard work alone is supposed to actually mean something. Or people who are just 10 years ahead of you in their career, working in somewhere in the arts or working somewhere in the media or something like that. Those traditional industries that have been well-paying jobs up until they started to really get meaningfully disrupted. So you look at your boss who does have all those markers of success and was able to achieve them at the age that you are now. And you're like, what am I doing wrong? I'm in this same business. But again, it's because people who have been able to go into these industries with some level of support, and so the income that they themselves are able to earn isn't as important as being able to do something that they enjoy doing. The comparison behavior, again, is throwing people off and making them feel like failures, when in reality, you chose a career that should have been lucrative, and you chose a career that, if you were born 10 years earlier, would have been lucrative for you. And you happen to be working with people who don't have the same financial footing as you do, but it doesn't necessarily mean there's a knock against you. It means that there's societal factors that are at play that you have to consider as you evaluate the landscape.
Yeah. I mean, I think that explains why there is so much resentment and nihilism kind of in our economy. You know, the implicit like contract or like promise of capitalism is like, if you work hard, presumably also if you get educated, you will be fine, right? And I think that's how you see like this huge push to get like that 4-year bachelor's, you know, just this kind of a lot of those kind of economic waves. And then you see now people are entering a job market where entry-level jobs, a lot of them don't even exist anymore, because either companies are not willing to train new people, they feel like they can use AI to do it. I mean, I think the unemployment rate for new college grads is very high right now. And so what happens kind of when that contract breaks down? And, you know, again, you start to kind of see people looking around saying, well, you know, I'm struggling so much. I feel like I did everything right. I'm turning to my left. I'm seeing somebody in the same place as me, and yet they can afford a house, or they can afford to like do these things because they have familiar support. So I think there's, again, a lot of resentment and a lot of just, like I said, like, why bother even playing this game anymore if it's not going to do anything for me? And the thing I always like to point out, too, is that the concept of the American dream is very much, you know, what, for example, baby boomers, you know, achieved is very much a policy-based event. The reason why a lot of baby boomers were able to afford homes, were able to retire comfortably, is because of certain policies that were passed. And so because a lot of the, like, not only is like people don't have access to like the bank of mom and dad, in our country, there's not really much of a safety net anymore. So you're adding these kind of additional layers where I think people feel like they're kind of one event away from having the bottom fall out from under them. And I think, again, that changes how people, their relationship to risk and reward and how they make financial decisions.
Let me give the counter evidence real quick, which is, we'll use this, Dave Ramsey, friend of the show. His study on millionaires is that the overwhelming majority, about 80%, say they did not receive any inheritance at all from their parents or family members. 1 in 5 say they've received some, but only 3% say they got $1 million or more. The Cato Institute, I think that's a right-leaning think tank, they say that 2/3 of US billionaires have self-made wealth. Just 1/3 of them have inherited a lot of it. So there is a disconnect among people who have a lot of money saying, I pulled myself up by the bootstraps and I got this myself.
Sure. I mean, how are billionaires defining themselves as self-made? I'm struggling to understand that term. Regardless, though, one of the biggest recipients of welfare, I'm not even talking about inheritance, one of the biggest recipients of welfare in this country are high-income people or people of high net worth. If you think about the tax system that rewards homeownership, if you think about, you know, things like employer-sponsored pensions or employer-sponsored 401ks, that predominantly is for people like that are in white-collar work or more affluent. So I think, too, like, even though maybe you're not getting, like, your parents handing you X amount of money, you're still benefiting from, you know, a system that, you know, gives breaks and financial incentives to people that already have assets or already have, you know, are making high income. I mean, you even see right now it's happening in states like trying to abolish property taxes, which, like, that is a whole other thing that we probably don't even want to get into. But, like, again, it's a great example of, like, policies that allow people that already have wealth to benefit. And again, yeah, that might not be from your parents, but that is a safety net.
That's not actually where I thought you were going to go. Your attack on the white collar worker is an attack on me, so I don't appreciate that very much.
I mean, listen, I'm attacking myself.
But really, though, I thought when you said billionaires, I thought you were talking about like Elon Musk, who's been one of the biggest recipients of support from the federal government.
Yeah, with the subsidies.
Basically his whole career.
Yeah.
And so that is where, when I hear billionaires say, I'm self-made, but you've received hundreds of billions of dollars from the federal government, that is your inheritance. Your inheritance came from our federal government. Or, to your point, I think you were making before about boomers generationally being so prosperous, it was because the system was set up to support younger people at the time that they were coming of age. So post World War II, everything was built in Congress to generate activity and generate economic prosperity. And it benefited people who were born in the 50s and the 60s because of all of that. And what didn't end up happening was once they got older, they left those same systems in place to benefit the next generation of younger people. They took all the benefit up the food chain with them. And so now in their 60s and 70s and 80s, they're receiving support once again from the federal government in the form of Medicare, Social Security, pensions from their jobs, all those kinds of things that have basically allowed them to climb the ladder to prosperity and then lift the ladder up with them. And so that's the disconnect.
It's trickle down economics, though.
It's trickle up economics.
We just have to let it trickle down. It'll come down eventually.
Well, so that's kind of the thing, though. It will trickle down. It's going to rain one day, one way or another, because biology is undefeated. But it's not going to rain on everybody. And that is the part that I think that we have to wrap our minds around psychologically, that when it rains, it will not rain on everybody. And it's going to be people walking around wondering, how come I am not getting hit? No matter where I'm trying to jump over here, I'm jumping, like I keep missing. And I don't get what's happening to me, because that K-shaped economy, it's only getting steeper in both directions. And you can see on a graph where it's projected to go terribly wrong.
This episode is sponsored by Capital Area Planning Group. Capital Area Planning Group is a fiduciary wealth management firm that specializes in helping high net worth individuals and families navigate the complexities that come along with managing concentrated stock options, multiple income streams, and an ever-changing tax code. While our team of certified financial planners are well-versed in all things personal finance, our areas of expertise include equity compensation, estate planning, and multi-year tax planning. At Capital Area Planning Group, we believe in pricing transparency. That's why our fees are posted on our website, right alongside the various services we perform on behalf of our clients throughout the year. If you're tired of receiving the same cookie-cutter advice from your financial advisor, then don't wait. Reach out to us today at capgllc.com to experience a better approach to wealth management. Again, that web address is www.capgllc.com.
All right, let's look at this data from wealth management firm Cerulli Associates. They say that more than $124 trillion worldwide will be handed over through about, let's call it 2050, from the Great Wealth Transfer. More than half of that will come from the high net worth, ultra high net worth people, the folks in the Dave Ramsey survey that pulled themselves up by the bootstraps. They had no family support or incentives around them to help their success. And now they need to give that money to the next generation.
You know what? It sounds right when you have a president who says, I built my business all by myself. I only received $1 million loan from my dad, and that's it. Or I think he said, I only received $1 million gift from my dad, and that's it. I mean, there's documented evidence of his dad supporting his entire career all the way into the grave. But the way he frames it is, I am self-made. I only received $1 million from my dad, and that was it.
And you know what's so interesting too is the linguistic pretzels people get themselves in to convince themselves that they aren't beneficiaries of something. So maybe it's, oh, my parents gave me a loan, or oh, maybe my parents invested in this startup, but they didn't give me the money directly. They just kind of invested in my startup. Or even my parents introduced me to the right person, the right investor, the right, future boss or whatever. All of those things are forms of support. And again, like I was saying before,
a friends and family round.
Exactly. And your perception of earning the dollar is very different than someone handing you a dollar. And so I think people contort themselves and convince themselves that, even though their parents are really handing them the dollar, it was earned, and again, it's all these different ways that people try to convince themselves that they aren't, benefiting from this system.
So I think there's a mix of factors at play. Number one, those parents, they're not doing the wrong thing, right? You're supporting your kid. And if they go on to be a success, you've done a great job. With Elon Musk, yeah, he got a bunch of help from federal subsidies, but also he was in the right place at the right time. At PayPal, when it was starting up, he had an ability to take an insane amount of risk. In the biography from Walter Isaacson on him. There's a story where he basically can't play poker with people because he would just either go all in or do nothing. And that was kind of like, he was wired differently. And yes, I think it is fair to say there's help from subsidies, but also that is one major factor in sort of a big old salad of them.
I think, though, really quickly, that is a very fair characterization, and I'm glad you put it that way, because where the dislocation is a person who has been that fortunate and has received that much support from everyone around him, then uproots the entire business from California to Texas, taking all of the benefits that the state of California has given to him and all the businesses that he's built all this time, all the educational capital, the brain power that comes from the California college system, and says, I don't want to pay taxes on any of this wealth that I've now built for myself and accumulated. So I'm going to relocate us to Texas and stick it to California. So yes, on one hand, sure, great for him. He was willing to take the risk that a lot of other people would not have been willing to take. He put it all on the line several times to make Tesla a thing, SpaceX even a thing. But you also have to have some recognition and appreciation for what you've been given along the way, the help you've received, and be willing to turn around and do something with that good fortune that's come your way. And that's the disconnect that I'm describing.
And I would also be very curious, if he would have taken the risks he had if he truly had, something to lose or didn't have that safety net, coming from
if he didn't have a diamond trader for a dad.
Exactly. If he didn't come from a quite affluent family, because I do think that, just knowing, like, even if your parents are not directly giving you money, just knowing that, like, if you lost it all, you could move back in with your parents and kind of figure it out. That alone gives you the ability to take risks that somebody who is not in that position would not be able to take. So, I do agree that Elon Musk is definitely a risk taker, and it has mostly paid off for him. But I wonder if he would take the risks that he was taking if he didn't have that, safety net.
I don't know. He loves doing podcasts that are between 3 and 8 hours long. He's welcome on anytime. What's up?
Ricky, I want to go back to where I think you were headed with that, though.
Yeah.
Which is that we shouldn't necessarily just frame this as a problem or frame this as a negative thing. Because as I mentioned, like in my day job, talking to 60, 70, 80-year-olds, I am basically helping them construct a plan to help their children without it knocking them so far off course that it disincentivizes them to do work, right? The old Warren Buffett, I want to leave my kids enough money to do anything they want, but not so much money that they don't do anything, right? So I think it's important that we also consider how fortunate the people are to be in a position to say, I want to help my children have an easier glide path than I had. And also the children the inheritors who will have an easier glide path than their parents had, and psychologically what that also does for you, right? What does that mean to you? And not necessarily frame this as solely this is a bad thing for society.
Oh yeah, I was going to say, I completely agree. And I mean, it's a very complicated issue, and I do respect the people that are trying to approach it with nuance. Because I think, what's that phrase? Like, the first generation earns it, the second generation, what is it, saves it, and the third generation spends it or something. So
the shirt sleeves in 3 generations.
Yeah. And so I have seen people who are, multiple generations from whoever earned the money. And you can just see that they're so disconnected from the value of a dollar or what it means to, like, earn a living wage. And so I have seen how that really can be quite corrupting. And I'm also very curious about the trend of celebrities or other, billionaires saying that they're not going to leave any money to their children. Mm-hmm. And I find that an interesting approach. But again, it just goes to show that there's no one way to do it. And I think, some people at least have been more cognizant about how that can, negatively affect their children and how to approach that in, like, a tactful way.
Couple things. Number one, I think the Warren Buffett thing is always interesting because he's talked about how much he doesn't want his kids to, like, just survive off the bank of mom and dad. I think they're like, they've got to be like 70 at this point. They're like 65. Yeah. So I think that's interesting. And then the second thing is, like, they're just going to his kid. A lot of the money's going to his kids' nonprofits. It's going to the Howard G. Buffett Foundation. How does Howard G. Buffett start that foundation without Father Warren in play? But no, I think it's important to have strings attached. Otherwise, you have kids making very bad art, putting on. Never mind. We'll go there later. I wanted to get there with. I wanted to go to this thing where what if the inheritance doesn't come like it's expected? Because you have. I think there is there's an expectation that a lot of people may have about getting help from mom and dad. But in reality, big shout out to our friends in the private equity industry. The average cost of a private room in a nursing home is now about $11,000 per month. I don't think that's going down. One of the promises of artificial intelligence is that you're going to get personalized medicine. There's talk of longer lifespans. So some folks may be planning for something like a 50-year retirement if wealthy people can get to 110 more on average than 80 to 90. And actually, I'll leave it there because I was going to do a third thing, but it doesn't relate to the two other things I said. I got the Obama thing where you want to go 1, 2, 3, but in this case, it's only 2.
My parents did a really interesting thing with their approach to giving us, my sisters and I, support in that, when we graduated high school, they said, okay, we've been saving up this money for you. Here it is, and we're not giving you any more money. So you should never expect any more money from us. This is it. You can do whatever you want with this money. You can use it to go to college. You can use it to not go to college. Do whatever you want, but this is all you're getting. And I'm more than a decade later, way more than a decade later, I haven't gotten any more money. That was really it. And I did use it for college. So I was very lucky that I didn't have to graduate with debt in that way. But I do think it was interesting because it did, I think, change and affect my relationship with them. And that I feel like, there's not a ton of expectation there in terms of financial. Like, I'm not kind of waiting for that inheritance or anything like that. And I also feel, as you just pointed out, about the cost of care and life expectancy, I want them to be set up for retirement, because I think, we see what's happening with Gen X and the sandwich generation where they're financially supporting their parents and also taking care of their kids. And so I think, anything I can do to like help them or allow them to continue to build wealth and have enough money for their retirement. But it is a tricky line to walk. I mean, a lot of it is like a guessing game, right? Like you don't really know how long you're going to live. You don't really know like how much healthcare you're going to need. So it is kind of a balancing act. And I'm curious what your experience has been like with your clients, Malcolm, because, you were talking about having that living inheritance, how you balance potentially giving your kids money while you're still alive, but also balancing your own needs.
Yeah, so I'm also talking about people who mathematically have far more money saved than they are ever going to live to spend in their lifetime. So if you think about a person who's been an executive at like Microsoft as an example, and Steve Ballmer was able to buy an entire basketball team with like 1/20th or 1/25th of the value of his Microsoft shares back in like 2014. And since then, the company's share price has like doubled. So I'm talking about a person who's been sitting on like $5 million of stock in one company, in addition to everything they've saved in their 401k, the multiple homes they own, those kind of things. Like, these people have more than enough to do anything they're ever going to need to do as far as long-term care is concerned, as far as like anything. And they're still terrified to give anything to their kids because they're saying, I don't want to corrupt them. What if I need it? There's all these conflicting emotions happening. And the thing that I point out is what you don't want to have happen is your kids probably, in this case, have no idea how much money mom and dad actually have. They know you're doing okay. They know you've done well for yourself. They know what your role was at so-and-so company you worked for. So they can put 2 and 2 together. But when they find out 30 years from now just how much was actually there, and then think through the fact that you watched them struggle with the things they struggled with, right? Like, we are having trouble affording tuition. We want to buy a new house in a place where the school system is better. We are dealing with this job that we hate and would love to be able to go do something else, but it's tough and mom and dad keep hearing us out complaining about it, and just say, well, you got to put in your time. Well, it's hard. But mom and dad very well could have afforded us a little bit of a safety net to say, go forth and conquer, and they chose not to. The resentment that could possibly bubble up at the point where there's literally nothing you can do about it at this point because you're already gone is the part that I'm like, you have the capacity to change the narrative right now.
Yeah.
You have the ability to help right now. And you can just message it in the sense that, like, this is a one-time thing. Like you said, we see what's happening and we want to do this equally amongst the kids. And so we're going to gift you $100,000, $200,000. We're going to gift you $100,000 worth of Microsoft stock, and you choose what you want to do with it. That's your business at that point. And we got 2 kids, 3 kids, 4 kids, 10 kids, whatever. We're going to give it to all of you one time, and you choose what you're going to use it for.
Yeah, there is something I have that is all really interesting. There is something that I've written about before where, when you expect it, even just like setting expectations of like, this is how much you can expect, or like, this is how much, as opposed to just like hearing it in a will, so to speak, because I think that does change how children approach that money. I think it's a much more likely, if you're having a conversation while you're still alive, that you can, it's a conversation. You can set better expectations. You can make a better plan for it. Because I'm sure also this has been your experience, like working with clients, but, when a child is getting an inheritance after their parent is gone, there's tons of emotion wrapped up in that. And also you're seeing it as like a windfall. And I think it's the same as like getting a tax refund or a bonus. A lot of times you don't see it as like, you're like, oh, free money. I can go spend this or do whatever with it. And so I think that is a concern there.
I've a wonder for Malcolm as well, dealing with the people who are not giving their Microsoft and NVIDIA shares to their struggling 30 to 40-year-old children who want to buy a house and maybe raise a family, but don't have the financial ability to do that. Is there a branding thing? Because an inheritance is a legacy, but a gift is a handout. And both of them are just, I don't want to give away a gift because then I'm just giving my kids a handout. But my inheritance, that's a legacy. That's what I've built. And that's the tradition that I pass it on after I'm gone. Even though, in one case, it's, your ROI for your kid is much greater in those sort of squeeze years.
I like the way you frame that. I do like to refer to it as your financial legacy because that feels better for everybody. And it is, to your point, it's a branding thing. It needs to be framed in a certain way to make sure that it lands the way you want to. And I like the idea of a living inheritance, which is just a phrase that we can use between us,
Better one,
advisor and client. And then you call it your financial legacy when you're talking to your kids. This is our financial legacy that we're passing along to you. And now it feels and sounds a lot different from a gift, like you said.
The one thing I want to talk about with this too, this was a little, I think there also is a line where I hear things, and this was more in the book Inheritocracy, where it's like, this economic system doesn't work. Look at this person I spoke to who basically got a arts degree and got a master's degree in art and then became a victim of an economic system because they couldn't find a job. And so I do think there is a middle where it's like, there are things that are structurally more difficult, but also, I do believe in the American ideal that we do have agency in our choices, where I'm not a victim if I got a master's in fine arts and now I can't find a job. Like, that is not the same. And often it's positioned like people who got a graduate degree are having trouble finding a job, when in reality, I think it's a lot of the time it's very specific degrees that are having a difficult time finding a job. Mm-hmm. And there's I understand why people don't want to say like, well, you made a bad choice taking out a bunch of student debt, going out of state, and then, getting a degree that doesn't have much of a market value. Yeah.
And I think that's a huge part of just like the personal finance advice industry and like world that I try to hammer over everybody's head, where it's like, yeah, there's like all these external forces that have a very direct influence on how we think about money, whether it be our friends, what we're seeing online, just like literally the policies and products that we interact with. But we also have agency. We're not just kind of in this river getting swept along. We can make deliberate decisions about how to handle our money. And it's like, how do we kind of balance both those things? Because I think there's a tendency where like, again, it's like traditionally in America, you believe it's all individual, we're in a meritocracy. And so I think people are moving away from that, but we don't want to switch all the way to the other side where it's like, there's almost like learned helplessness where it's like, I can't do anything about my situation. It has to be a balance between the two.
And also accepting that things are what they are.
Yeah.
And deciding how you're going to move forward from there, I think is maybe the point you're making. And I'm just saying it a little more harshly. But like in reality, if you are a person in your 30s or 40s who is watching what is happening in the world and saying, I am not a trust fund baby. I am not a person who's going to inherit $1 million from my parents or my grandparents or whoever else. And so I'm going to be disgruntled for the rest of my life while I watch this happen. That's a choice. Or you could say, with that information, here's how I'm going to move forward. Here's how life's going to look different for me. Here's how I'm going to frame the way that I view everything else that's happening around me and how I will proceed as a person who's not going to participate in that. I'm not 6'6". I would love to be so I could play in the NBA. But since I'm not, and I'm never going to be, I watch the NBA with an admiration for what they're able to do. And that's about where it stops. Like, so not to sound dismissive, but I think you also have to at some point recognize that like we're handed the cards that we're dealt and we got to play them. Like it just is what it is.
Yeah. I mean, our relationship with money is so psychological. And so it's a lot of the work that comes with personal finance is just understanding your own relationship with money and deciding what is enough for you. Money's a tool to help you live the life you want to live. And I think we can all agree there is always going to be somebody richer than us. And that doesn't mean they're necessarily happier. That just means they have more money on paper. And so, I think, everybody individually needs to decide kind of what that number is to them and kind of what they want to use money to do. Because I don't think a lot of people have sat down and thought, why am I saving this money? Or like, what is my goal? Like, what am I trying to use money for in my life? And I think once you kind of start to think through that, you can get to a better place where you're content with, less maybe, or just not $1 billion.
Be where your feet are. It's something I've had to remind myself a lot of times over the past few months, but that's a good place to end it for part 1. All right, part 2, I want to talk about how the bank of mom and dad impacts relationships, dating, and our relationships more specifically with our parents. So we'll see you for part 2.
Information shared in this recording and by its guests represent the views and opinions of the guests and does not represent the views or opinions of the host. This content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. This content is not, nor is it intended to be a substitute for professional financial advice. It is always recommended that you seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your personal financial situation.